have the pleasure of being here, accompanied by incredible CIOs. My name is Sofia Guerra, and I'm a vice president at Bessemer Venture Partners. And I also have the pleasure of working with the Qventus team. We're investors in the company. We've been investors in Qventus for over 5 years now. And just to share a little bit about who Bessemer is, for those of you in the crowd who don't know us, because probably the only investor here. Bessemer is the oldest venture capital firm in the country, dare I say, the world. We've been around for over 100 years. And we're a large multi-stage technology fund. So you see lots of numbers in this slide. We are managing over $19 billion in assets under management today. And we've had the pleasure of working with over 150 companies that have gone public, lots of M&A, and a lot of the logos that you see in this page are some of the companies that we've had the pleasure of working with closely over decades. Some of the healthcare logos that you'll see here, Abridge, Smarter DX, and the Qventus team. But less about me, and we'll love to introduce our wonderful panelists. Dr. Morgan Jeffries from Geisinger, Dr. Joseph Sanford from the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, and Dr. Dwight Rum, sorry about that, from Rochester. I would love for you guys to introduce yourself, maybe use 60 seconds to tell us a little bit about your role, and particularly your system, some of the demographics, and if you do work with the Qventus team, in what form. Maybe we'll start with you, Dwight.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Dwight Rom, and not a doctor, just to be clear on that, even though my initials are DR. I am from Rochester, New York, and I'm actually the Chief Digital Information Officer for Rochester Regional Health. We're a 9-hospital system in upstate New York. We kind of span from west of Rochester all the way up to the St. Lawrence region and have a large, about 25,000 square mile area that we serve. In addition to those 9 hospitals that we have over 300, actually almost 400 ambulatory sites that we care for patients. And if you think about our system, we essentially span, this huge demographic and geographic space. And in a lot of ways, it looks like America in miniature. As many other systems in the country have struggled with, the coming out of COVID and then, rebuilding the business and integrating, I think we're right there with them, right? We as an organization are in transformation and are really trying to leverage technology. For myself personally, I have been in the technology field for 30 years at this point now, and 26 of those in healthcare, mostly on the technology side. And have done a lot of work with AI over the past, 15 years or so, particularly a time that I spent at Hopkins. That's very different now with Rochester Regional. We are a non-academic health system, and while we have full intention and investment in a lot of new technologies and a lot of new startups, in large part, we are a consumer of technology. So enough about me.
Thank you. All right, maybe I'll pass it down to Dr. Sanford.
Certainly, good morning. I think that many of y'all heard Tammy's introduction to UAMS, but just as a very brief reminder, UAMS is the state's only level 1 academic trauma center. So we see everything that everybody else doesn't want to see, and then a couple of tertiary and quaternary references. So we have international reputation in multiple myeloma with a growing cancer center based around heme oncology. We have a blowing and going orthopedics and musculoskeletal sports medicine practice. Proud to be the official sports medicine providers for the Arkansas Razorbacks. We have a, I would say, comprehensive academic GME environment spanning the state. We're 1 primary square mile of Little Rock, Arkansas, where we see the largest population of patients, but we have a catchment area that is the entire geographic distribution of Arkansas. So we serve kind of nominally 3 million people across 25,000 square miles, of which maybe 3 or 4 counties of the 75 in Arkansas could be considered truly urban. So we have a very high socio-demographic mix, and we have, I'd like to joke that you don't have to go very far out of Little Rock, Arkansas to start hitting dirt roads, and then pretty immediately after that, you'll hit well water. And after that, you can't always guarantee electricity. So we still have patients that have needs that are very mid 20th century in our early 21st century world. And so we're using our technology to be able to serve a large group of people where they're at rather than where we want them to be.
Thank you. All right, last but not least, Dr. Jeffries.
Yeah, so I'm Morgan Jeffries. I'm the medical director for AI at Geisinger. We are a large integrated health system in central and northeast Pennsylvania with about 10 hospitals, exactly 10 hospitals. And we have our own insurance arm. We've got a long history of doing innovative work, and we're currently applying that to AI, which is really where me and my teammates come in. I think that's about it.
Wonderful. Sorry, I went in the wrong order. It's 9 a.m. Anyway, all right, so at Bessemer, we think that we're in the middle of one of the biggest technological transformations of the last few decades, even potentially for a long time. And I think medicine is going to be one of the industries where we think that the biggest impact is going to be had. Lots of unstructured data, lots of complexity in processes, and particularly how do we diagnose and scale the services that we all have. And as CIOs, you're at the epicenter of all of this, right? Managing or balancing huge potential with obviously the risks that come with deploying these technologies in medicine, the role that regulation will play here. And you're kind of managing all of this with, I'm assuming, lots of changes around you from the market, headwinds, tailwinds, as well as pressure from the board to innovate and take on a lot of this technology, probably from all of the folks that you work with in different functions, also thinking about what this is going to mean for their jobs. Curious to kind of hear from all of you, how is your role as CIO changing? How is it today? And potentially, how has it been different today that it was maybe 12 months ago? Do you want to start?
Yeah, I think it's a tumultuous time is the best way to describe it. I think when we met earlier about this panel, I described it that time as a flume ride or a whitewater rafting trip. And some of us are in the raft and some of us aren't. Some are floating down the river, and around the bend we hear something, but we don't know exactly what's on the other side of that bend, if it's falls or peaceful water. That's to say that there is just so much coming at us right now that we're trying to hang on, quite honestly. The volume of change, whether it's the technology pieces or the regulatory landscape or the market itself, is throwing a speed of change at organizations that it is actually really hard to adapt at the pace that change is coming at us. And I think we're an early implementer, early adopter now of Qventus, early in our implementation phase. That's just one example, of an AI tool that we're bringing to bear. But we have this landscape of long-standing investments with large platform players that we have to navigate, and it's not like everything was perfect to start with, right? The boats that we were in had cuts and tears. There are things from a discipline standpoint that we have to really execute on. So it's a very difficult time, and I think a lot of organizations are struggling with how to adapt to that change at the pace it's coming.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think that, well, I can only speak for my organization, but there's as much managing up as there is managing down. In the 20, even maybe 10 years ago, the CIO role was very much baked in traditional IP, standard operating procedures, guarantee uptime. There wasn't much in the way of fault tolerance or really, we're going to try something and see how that works, and maybe even do a little A/B testing between our hospitalist group and our critical care group and see what wins out, because so many of the tools today that we want to implement can't be trialed in a demo environment. They can be vetted for integrated and functional testing, but you can't know what they do or how to make them do what you want them to do until you put them into production. And I think that's been kind of the key and critical difference is Chief Clinical Informatics Officer as opposed to traditional CIO with whom I have a peer relationship, is that we're a software development house now. We're not buying something off the shelf, installing it, turning it on, and sustaining it. We are tinkering with it. We are doing co-development projects. We are asking questions of our users in ways that is not really pure operational kind of deployment satisfaction, but not actually proper research because we don't have an intent to publish. And so we have a whole layer of system architecture, and I joke about this at work, but I am building the doctor's Orwellian nightmare, right? I am designing systems that are heavily influencing how they're making decisions. We're using all the tricks of behavioral economics. Everything that you read online is dark patterns in the web. I'm explicitly building in the EMR in order to affect the outcome that I want. And so how do you build governance around that to make sure that everything you're doing is failing safely, remains on the right side of ethical and moral behavior, but at the same time is helping the health system achieve its goals as a system. And that's a whole rhetoric and playbook that I think is novel to, I'd say, 2015 to today. It's not something that we ever really even had the tools to start meaningfully trying to do, as much as informatics was talking about it 20 years ago.
Interesting.
Yeah, so my role is specifically as medical director for AI. So a lot of the things that you would see as a CIO 2 years ago, I wasn't really dealing with. How our team looked 2 years ago, it was a small group of data scientists and engineers, and we had built probably I think like 5 to 10 had deployed AI systems that were active, running, and delivering business impact, but not something. We weren't a group that got a lot of demand. So there were specific initiatives that were identified, and it was like, okay, I think would solve this problem, and would go out and do that, and then monitor it and whatnot. But we weren't dealing with what we're dealing with now. Now the issue is everybody wants AI. I mean, since the generative boom started, basically it changed things. Predictive AI you can only apply in certain places. So you're very focused in what you do, and also people usually are not clamoring to have an alert thrown in their face. So there wasn't as much excitement about it. Now we can really streamline workflows, and suddenly it's just everyone is asking for things. So they're asking us to build things, which we do. We don't train our own models, or we don't train our own foundation models. I mean, we train our own predictive models, but even with generative AI, I mean, we're building using just APIs and wrapping logic around that. But there's a lot of work that we have to do sort of for enablement of vendor solutions. So there's a gap between what's provided and what we'll actually need in terms of monitoring, for example, for harm or business impact. And so, and a lot of times they need us to engage with the vendors also in doing, the discovery and trying to figure out, okay, what exactly is it that this thing does? So we've had to grow the team, and we've had to reorganize explicitly as product teams. We've had data scientists moving into product management roles, and we've been hiring specific, people with product management experience, some designers, and just reorganizing with that structure. To manage demand, we've built out a dedicated discovery team that basically goes to look for higher impact use cases through interviewing people from different parts of the business and trying to line that up from the directives we've been given by, pretty loose directives, by our executive leadership in terms of these are the areas that we really want to focus on, so let's try to align what we're doing with that. And then trying to match that to the resources that we have available, given our current docket of projects.
Yeah.
Also a significant investment of time and effort has gone into standing up a governance process, both building out a policy, both designing a policy and then actually building out the process and then figuring out which parts of that process work and which don't.
Yeah.
Which a lot don't. We've been slowly coming to the understanding that the process that we had built, where we're reviewing each AI system that comes through, whether it's from a vendor or something that we build individually through this committee, is not going to scale It's just not really going to be possible to do that, especially as we have some of our existing vendors rolling out agentic platforms on top of their software. So, like ServiceNow or Workday, where, it's designed for you to be able to spin up a new agentic like system pretty quickly. But then each of those would qualify as a system that requires governance and needs, an assessment for possible harm, an assessment for equity, a monitoring plan, and an escalation plan. And so, we typically will, like, what we've been doing is like reviewing those one-on-one, or like one at a time, and saying like, okay, well, this is what you need to do, and then we also have to lend out our people to help them actually accomplish those things, because typically the program owners don't know how to do those things on their own.
Yeah.
And so we have this huge backlog, and we're gradually realizing like, oh no, we actually need to hand over governance to to these platform owners to make sure that these solutions they're spinning up are conforming to our policy. So like a lot of work around that as well.
Well, I want to come back to
Sure.
governance specifically, but you did mention the different systems and platforms, and I think Dr. Sanford, you say you were a software development shop yourself, and you're taking in and partnering with companies, which it's a little bit different how you're thinking about some of these decisions. Curious kind of how you think about the building blocks for having an AI-ready tech stack. Like, Jeffries, you talked about some of the teams and how you're scaling that team to kind of take on a lot of the work. But how do you think about like the core pieces of that and how you're managing or making decisions to be AI ready?
Sure, I'll take the first crack at that. So I think what we do, we lean on our academic background. So the tripartite mission of education, research, and clinical care serves as a good foundation for that. So to kind of some more point, we can split off some of the responsibilities. If it's a pure research tool, the clinical governance doesn't have to have a role in that because it's not patient facing. And then we always think about it in terms of are we going to build it, are we going to buy it, or are we going to or build, partner, or buy off the shelf? An example of buying off the shelf would be using Epic as an example, the in-basket automated response technology. Very little you're going to do to customize that. You're certainly not going to do any co-development with Epic. You're turning it on at either a la carte pricing or as part of your generative AI suite. In the clinical environment, despite the fact that UAMS has a reasonably performant, high-performance computer system and some partnerships with our flagship undergraduate campus up in Fayetteville, I'm not going to take even an off-the-shelf LLM, put a custom RAG on that, and then put that in a clinical environment. I can't, as good as our IT teams are, I can't guarantee uptime. I can't guarantee model drift. All of the things that you need to invest a 7-figure data science team in, I don't have. We're a very lean shop. And so it's in the research realm where they can play with those, I won't say toy problems, but investigational problems. We will let them have something like an Azure Foundry where they can bring their models to a protected, CISO endorsed environment, and they can be tolerant of, we've got 14 hours of downtime because reasons, doesn't matter. Whereas a 1-hour downtime in the clinical environment is intolerable. The same is then true for education. Those tools that they're pulling out are run up through the purview of they're doing all the plagiarism, all the how do we teach with AI, how do we incorporate that into the undergraduate and graduate programs. That gets to be partitioned and then overseen by a general umbrella governance group, which is kind of the only way that we can begin to wrap our arms around it. We have to take those smaller bites.
Yeah, and from my perspective, more from a CIO's perspective, there are some very clear building blocks. When I mentioned earlier, the need to have a boat that was, seaworthy or whatever, these are those things, right? You've got to have a cloud presence, and that means more than just, I'm using Workday in the cloud. That means you have to have an infrastructure as a service, intentional design and architecture for networking and cybersecurity. The second component you really need to have there is, from a technical standpoint, is a modern data architecture and platform. And that means more than just Epic's Cogito stack. That means bringing all your data together into equal footing with governance so that you're actually assessing across all your different data sources what is authoritative, what is canonical. You have an actual process for navigating and disputing and understanding how you're going to regulate that. I think the third component, and you kind of touched on a little bit, is that need for governance writ large, whether it's build, partner, or buy. You have to have a really rigorous program in place for doing that. Those are I would say, foundational building blocks. From my perspective, a lot of this comes down to, though, how are you going to scale and how are you going to sustain? I've worked extensively in my career on the academic side, building really neat AI tools, whether it was ML or computer vision. And then fundamentally it comes down to how do you launch that thing so that it's actually delivered at the point of care at scale. And what I'm finding is that there are a lot of initiatives that we can do that may be one-offs, and they may be things that we build once and we run once kind of thing, and it brings real value. But then if you're going to have truly sustained change in behaviors, whether it's in diagnosis or therapy or how you're going to manage a safety event or whatever within the EMR, you have to be much more intentional about how you architect that and navigate that from that buy build sort of perspective. So, I think that is a key challenge, and you need to have a thesis on how you're going to do it. As a non-academic, my thesis is much more of the, am I going to buy, am I going to integrate, build, versus probably, I think an academic may be looking at that from a slightly different perspective. But, when we come back to, this volume of change that's coming at us, I think we're going to have to rely on a lot of these mega vendors out in our space to help achieve the scale and sustainment of that long term.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add on that, but I would say one area that stands out to me, probably because it's a gap for us right now, is in workforce readiness. I feel like when we deal with stakeholders, we've seen people in two camps, which are hardcore skeptics, which we're seeing fewer and fewer of those, and then the people who have drank the Kool-Aid and feel like this could do all sorts of crazy things and maybe don't have the most realistic or nuanced picture of AI and what's possible or easily achievable. So I think the faster we can get people to that point, the better. I honestly feel like just having ready access to an AI assistant that people are using and then having discussions around, you kind of, as you use the tools, you kind of get to the point fairly quickly where you're like, oh no, I'm not going to trust it for something like that. It's definitely, that's going to be a lot of work to get it to do this task consistently. Think how often it fails, on my everyday tasks. There's a capability reliability gap that's sort of underappreciated for people who are just coming into it and just looking at these things kind of in the past few months, where they're like, wow, it's so much, it can do so many things, that not having the same level of appreciation of, yeah, but not all the time. And there are a lot of applications where we need them to do this all the time. We're also appreciating that the educational gap there in the area of governance, where as program owners are bringing their programs through, they are perceiving our process as being just sort of this really onerous, this burden that's been put on them, and they don't understand why we're doing it, and they may sort of abstractly understand well, yeah, obviously prevent harms, but maybe treating human in the loop as more of a security measure than it really is, or a stronger security measure than it actually is, not realizing that humans have failings and there are things that they
the guardrails for.
Yeah, and then but then also, not appreciating if something happened with the system, it's not just, it may not just be to like one person. It could be something where it's a huge black eye to the organization. And if we are trying to be leaders in AI, that it actually sets us back, 5 to 10 years.
We routinely have conversations about someone's going to be on the front page of the Times, and we really don't want it to be us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that, to me, that's, their answers were great, but that is one area that kind of stands out to me of like, yeah, we really need to have that educational piece. So we're working on that now.
It sounds like there's a, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if I could double down on that, we're kind of at this crest right now of AI buzz and hype cycle. And I think there's this continuous need to remind folks that it's not a magical solution. Yes, it's incredibly powerful and it has its place. But that doesn't mean that we don't have responsibility to be rigorous in our evaluation and very thoughtful about the implementation of it.
Yeah, I think that there's this kind of separation between AI being a black box that can do a lot of things and the potential of what it has, and then seeing solutions that consistently deliver high quality output at scale, understands all of this long tail of potential cases depending on how it's being used to actually give reliable output, and I build the trust with the users and also be part of their workflows, right? Dr. Seyfried, you mentioned there is kind of some of the back office. We use this terminology at Bessemer of like the administrative layer. There's a lot of this back office use cases. Some of them are kind of low-hanging fruit for an HR to do. Some others on the front office, or particularly on the diagnosis side, treatment and how you interact with patients, that's kind of where the bar gets a lot higher. We tend to call these kind of care operations or front office use cases. Curious if there are examples on how you're deriving signal from noise or building kind of understanding who really meets that bar and what kinds of things you're using. And then if there are other examples from the other two systems where you've made a decision of partnering versus building or buying.
Sure. So I think it comes back to reinforcing kind of the points made just a second ago about what are the tools actually capable of doing, and do we understand that? We tend to think of software as humans in the binary, because that's literally what it was. It either worked as designed or it didn't, and that was by definition a bug, and you had to go and fix that. Now we're moving into this probabilistic space, and how people relate to that, they think of them as pieces of technology, so they should just work. But then they also have a misunderstanding of that output, appearance of working, is not necessarily the work itself. And then on top of that even, there has been a push, right, wrong, or otherwise, by the industry to anthropomorphize these agents and tools, even just by calling them agents, to give them human characteristics, to make them more personable, to make them stickier, to make it more engaging. And that now puts an entire new set of expectations on what these things can do or can be trained to do versus out-of-the-box performance. And I just don't think that anyone has a truly good intuitive sense of where the market really is or what these tools truly are capable of. Everyone thinks they're buying data from Star Trek, and they're not. There's no real reasoning or critical thinking here. And so, okay, how does that apply to your question? Where are we actually using this? I'm trying to be very grounded in, for the most part, these are large language models trained on text that are good at doing probabilistic interpretation and reasoning on, I think in one of the recent, someone said GPT-5 was trained on literally everything that humanity has ever written. And so can put very, very compelling output unless you actually know and are an expert in whatever it's outputting. And that's where you start to see the seams. And so when we deploy our use cases, we want to try and stay humble. What can we do at a low cost that takes a very discrete, reproducible idea we know has a robust data set behind it that is unlikely to be polluted with a lot of noise. And I'll use CPT querying or CDI coding as an example, and then is processing that information in such a way as to be within its sweet spot and amenable to the UI UX that the user is going to see. So they're not They're not hearing something or seeing something from the agent that just is completely far field. So we do it for CDI queries. We do it for simple text generation and conversion to help speed up the user. Ambient is a great example of where, if it does nothing else, ambient will have been a win, because doing the fast Fourier transform of voice to transcription is largely a solved problem. It's very amenable to being deployed at scale in the cloud. You can do that in terms of summarization with a set of simple prompts that give you good structured data out of it. And the human in the loop component is always going to be there, that someone is putting their professional on the line to the content. But I think that Morgan made a really good point. You can't trust the user to always be that safeguard. We have seen time and time again where the user is going to do what they think the system wants it to do, or we compare users to electricity. They always find the fastest path to the ground. They always do the thing that you don't expect them to do to get to the behavior that they want to have had done. And so you have to, not just plan for the edge scenarios that you think that they're going to come up with, but the thing that you couldn't imagine they would consider a good idea and yet find a way to do anyways. And so back of house, it's very transactional. It's very one for one. Front of house, it's very much built around where am I going to have an expert that should have a high index of suspicion of the output and use it to augment rather than replace their capabilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll jump in. I think ambient's a great example of an incredible use case that's just winning hearts and minds. We're actually rolling out a bridge across our entire system right now. Talk about a pitch over the center of the plate. That one was a huge satisfier. Very few technologies have I had physicians banging down my door, but this is one of them to drive an adoption of that. I think some other kind of obvious use cases for me are moving it out of more into the operational space and the administrative space. We've used it extensively to rewrite our job descriptions, right? I mean, as a system that came together through acquisition, we had hospital X analyst and hospital Y analyst, and just rationalizing all that just became a whole lot easier with these generative tools. I think the other area where I see just tremendous opportunity, there are tons of those, by the way, also in the administrative space that I think can drive efficiency. But where I see from a very kind of technologist lean and perspective is, as I need to build capacity and I have fewer and fewer people to do it, how am I going to do that with my technologist? Right, so I've been terming this AI for IT. I mean, sure, I'm sure you guys use Claude or things like that in software development, but we just have routine analysts that are doing Epic Build, not really writing code. They're doing more configuration. We've got people doing support desk operations. There's a lot of efficiency that we can gain there, obviously, but more than that efficiency gain, I'm looking for capacity. Because how can I roll out the changes? How can I address all those issues that I have from cybersecurity or data quality or whatever? How do I gain capacity to do that? And I think the bet there for us is really how do we enable our IT operators to leverage these tools at scale so that we can increase our pace of change?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I would say in the predictive space, for structured predictive models, we will build almost all of those on our own. I mean, at this point, we've been doing that for long enough that if it's like we're pulling data, whatever structured data, I mean, usually out of the EHR, but whatever source, and then trying to build like a binary classifier would be the most common thing. We know how to do that well enough, and it's a lot easier for us to do that locally and then validate and test that model on our own local data than it is to have a vendor come in that has to go through a security and architectural review, and then we have to work out with them the details of like, okay, so how are we going to locally validate this? We've actually had this come up recently where somebody was working and they'd been talking to a vendor for a while, and they were asking, they were like, yeah, we'd like to get this deployed. And we just told them, we were like, we will bring this through intake, and if there's adequate value, we'll rebuild this ourselves, but that's definitely going to be easier than us working through this vendor. So that piece we would generally take on our own. I would say if there is an exception to that, it would probably involve if there were, and I mean, we can really do this kind of thing in Epic, but if there were some kind of like deep workflow integration, there might be an area where a vendor could handle that better than we could. So like maybe, and again, I mean, even in Epic, like we can bring our own models. So like that's the most obvious case where that would occur, and that doesn't really apply. But conceivably, we might go with a vendor in a situation where it's like, well, it's got to be like in this workflow, right in this way, and it's hard to engineer something to do that. Apart from that, so like we're really I feel like it took us a while to get around to start building things with generative AI. It was last fall before we even did anything, and it was almost like, it was like a weekend project almost. We built our own chatbot. It's like the hello world of generative AI applications. And we did that because at the time, the one that we had available, which was Microsoft Copilot, was not good. It was really just not good at all. And it took us probably 3 to 4 weeks to build an MVP. And then something that was helpful about that whole process was that it took us months to get it deployed, and we discovered all these bottlenecks as a result of that, like how long it took for platform services to have enough time that they could set up environments for us to run this thing in, as just one example. And we figured out things about change management, that those processes need to be sped up. So we found a lot of things out. At the end of it, by the time we were ready to deploy it, it was like somebody was like, oh yeah, I think actually Copilot has like some of the features that we said were missing before. They're there now. And we started playing around with it and realized we were like, okay, we could have a whole team trying to keep up feature parity with this, or we could just switch and use this. And it made more sense at that point. But I think it was good that we did it, because if you don't start building, then you don't start building.
Or understand the capabilities of these systems too.
Yeah, you got to start with something. So we're starting to work on we have some other programs in the pipeline now that we're working on, but it's, we're obviously, again, not training our own models. We're building things around, where we're calling out to a foundation model using an API. I think we will figure out how to do that over time, like the best way to do that. I know, the models are very smart in a sense, but smart can mean different things, and they're also really dumb in certain ways. I think the fact that they have distinct training and inference modes and they don't continue to learn as they're running puts them at a real disadvantage compared to humans when you're thinking about humans are smart enough to say, I'll wing it. I'm going to go in there and figure it out as I go, which is not a thing that you can do with one of those models. They won't figure it out as they go. They've learned everything they're ever going to learn. So figuring out what's in their wheelhouse, and then figuring out how you need to constrain them to keep them from doing something really unpredictable, because when they do fail, it frequently is in ways that, unlike with a human, where you're like, yeah, they're okay at their job. You can kind of tell when somebody's going to. A lot of times with these foundation models, it's like it fails at a time. You're like, I could not have seen that coming. I have no idea what happened. So, and then for larger solutions, I think we're going to be doing that more with point solutions where there's not a vendor that we, that we would necessarily, it's small enough that it's like a problem, but it's not something that we would necessarily want to go to a vendor for, or we don't have a vendor that kind of deals with that class of problems more broadly. And I think over time, something that we're trying to figure out, and this is hard in this space right now, ideally we would have a sort of optimal mix of vendors that we work with, that we would sort of maximize the surface area of problems that we're covering with the fewest number of vendors. I don't know the exact optimality function, but you get what I'm going for. It's like if we could have 5 vendors and cover all these problems, it's certainly better than having 10 vendors and covering the same problems. That would be a challenging optimization problem to begin with, but added to that, there's this element of the problems that vendors are covering is changing really rapidly. So, we're seeing vendors where they get into a space like ambient listening. Initially it's just the note generation.
Yeah.
Then it gets into well, now we're going to help you with selecting the right ICD code. So like they expand. And so it's hard to predict, okay, in 5 years, what is this vendor going to be doing?
Right.
And do I want to be in
capabilities
business
are
with them?
changing. Yeah, and these models are changing so fast that the things that you could do today are going to be very different that you'll be able to do in 5 years. Absolutely. One of the things we've done a lot of research. We surveyed over 450 payers, providers, and pharma. About a third of that were providers. A lot of them touched on this point on like the platform versus best of breed and the opportunity to, do you want to partner with best of breed solutions, but then you also are managing all of these vendors. And one of the things that folks brought up was this term co-development, right? Like how do you have input into what's going on and what's being developed with a partner that you trust that has delivered you great kind of product in a certain area? Are there examples of how you've done this? Is that something that is interesting to your different systems?
Co-development's very interesting to us. It's just about the only way, again, being a rural state, academic medical center, Arkansas doesn't have the greatest reimbursement. I am not flush. Liquidity is a real problem for me to go out and partner or buy tools. So we try to trade expertise for co-development opportunities that give us strongly discounted rates, among other things. And in the case of Qventus, the opportunity for co-development was, easily the best that I've ever worked with, because we had, and I'll use PAT as an example, we had a targeted use case, an immediate problem, a willing team on the Qventus side, reasonably deep subject matter expertise, and once we kind of said, okay, we're going to do the thing, we cranked, and we got turnaround on that. Not measured in months, but measured in weeks. That is, really exciting because, and additionally, we're a state agency in ways various and subtle sometimes. So it's not like I can have an evergreen fund on my BioVenture side, tech transfer that can take an investment in a company and say, we are going to be explicitly in the market for shared upside. For a lot of reasons that you can elaborate, venture capital and PE does not like having universities and state agencies on the cap table. It makes a mess of things. So how do we get in the game, right? If we want to be in the market, if we want to be seen as a tech transfer, area of rapid development, we can only do it through these contractual relationships. And I think, I'll speak to Arkansas, I think Arkansas is the perfect place for it because of all of the socioeconomic demographic things I talked about. And if you build a solution in Arkansas and it works, it'll play internationally. If you build a solution in the Bay Area and it works, it's pretty much going to work in the Bay Area. So I think we've got a good thing going. Sorry.
Enables you to have a lot more control on how you're involving the humans in the loop in their day-to-day, right? And how you're tracking some of the output that we were discussing. And then who are the right humans to be verifying the output from these models? And anything else?
Yeah, I would love to chime in on this. I think partnership and co-development are really key. As Morgan was saying earlier, the need to localize the models, I think that's just inherent in a lot of the technologies that we're adopting. So you have to be able to do that. That's sort of table stakes to even adopt these tools, that partnership and collaboration. I think also it's important, and it's evident that both my colleagues up here have this baked into their organizations. You've got to have the intellectual capacity and the actual people capacity to be dance partners in this. So that's something that we're trying to develop as we move forward into a new innovation center and really building that capacity to become much more full partners and co-developers.
That's great. I know we've talked a little bit about workforce management of the folks, the clinicians up on the front lines, also back office. And then there's also this new concept of kind of your AI workforce. Curious how you're thinking about managing this. And I imagine as CIOs, you have teams that you're leading or trying to kind of bring in other leaders from other functions to kind of help manage this. How are you balancing this, and how do you think this is going to change as some of these AI agents kind of become more prevalent in your organizations?
I think it starts with people. You talk about an AI workforce as though it was an independent entity, and I feel pretty comfortable saying that companies that have tried to replace humans whole scale with any AI service agent at this point have failed and needed to walk it back. I expect to see Salesforce do the same in maybe 6 months to a year's time, because they just made a big push of saying, I don't need humans anymore. I think it's a force multiplier. You multiply by 0, you get 0. We in healthcare are in particularly stressed about the shortage of the human workforce already. We're several dozen thousand physicians short in 10 years or so. Chronic nursing shortages. We don't have anything like the number of people we need in any part of our organization. And so really being explicit that, I'm not gonna take your job. I may not hire you 3 more FTEs if the AI tool works as a force multiplier should, but any human of good professional competence in healthcare is gonna have work, because there's just too much work to be done otherwise. And I think that anchoring it in that is really important, because it should take fear off the table if you're sincere in that position as we are.
Yeah, I mean, I have very limited concerns, certainly for myself, but also like generally about AI, like a standalone AI worker replacing a human worker for almost any job today or in the near future. I do think because it's a force multiplier that like it could lead to reduced hiring. And I mean, we have talked about in some cases that like the savings that could come, if we wanted to talk about financial impact from rolling out a certain tool, that it might involve, workforce reductions, but we tend to focus on, well, we just won't replace, we might slow down hiring in this one area, or if someone leaves, we might not replace them, rather than like, letting people go, which nobody's really comfortable with. But I think I can say pretty much with a straight face to anybody, almost anyone who asks, like, yeah, you're not in danger of being replaced.
I would just agree with everything you just said. I think the number is 10 or 11,000 people are turning 65 or older every single day. So we've got this huge increase in demand, right? And then workforce participation is continuing to decline. And then, I'm a Gen Xer, right? There aren't as many of us to take care of those aging populations. So the gap, the supply-demand gap, is just yawning when it comes to healthcare and getting worse. So if you have a reasonable brain on your shoulders and the ability to use these tools, you'll have a job. I'm not really worried about that.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think the average age in certain functions, even within the admin stack, not just physicians, but it's very different. So retirement rate, and obviously like the appetite to learn new skills and adopt technology will also be different. But we often say like we love having like giving superpowers or kind of spacesuits to a lot of workers, and how do you do your job 10, 20 times better, or have skills that you would not have been able to have if it wasn't for AI? I think you were going to make
to the back of house kind of question, I have a particular fear of, are y'all familiar with the dead internet theory? Okay, so for those that don't know it, the dead internet theory says that no one is online anymore. All you see is bots talking to bots. And certainly we've experienced that on the search side where, Google's not any good anymore, right? Everything's so over SEO optimized, and the obvious machine learning produced content is so unhelpful that in my case, if you don't attach Reddit to your search string, then you might as well not get anything even close to useful. So I have this fear of what I'm calling the dead healthcare administration theory of operations, where all the back of house functions are going to be bots screaming at bots, and my competition is a TPA with a 36% profit margin and a couple dozen $1 billion in liquidity every year to throw at this problem to keep more money and act like a bank. And I've got my 2.75% profit margin and an academic and research enterprise that I have to subsidize before I can make any investments in being better at my clinical duties. That's going to be a really bad future, because healthcare systems will lose every time. And if we think that, CDI inquiries and peer-to-peers are bad now, when the major players of the world have the ability to automate at scale and replace their largely transactional human workforce with tools that let them be 1,000 to 1 more effective. You were talking about 10 or 20 to 1 more effective. I'm 2 orders of magnitude out of the game. And so I don't know what the answer is. Maybe it's regulatory, maybe it's just we all go value-based and we sidestep the whole conversation on prior authorization and the advantage plans. But it is a logical consequence of the drivers of our economic system in healthcare right now. And if anyone wants to talk about it afterwards, I'm more than happy to do so, because I think it's something we have to be thinking about early.
I love that theory. For what it's worth, we do think providers are at the forefront of adopting these technologies and reaping more of the benefits than any other stakeholder. So kudos to you guys. I want to leave on a positive note, maybe just do a quick rapid fire, like 15 seconds each of you. Over the next 3 to 5 years, what's one AI development or one use case that you want to see has like met reality? I think expectations today are high, but it has met reality. I'll start with you, Dr. Jeffries.
Oh, damn.
Like I've asked right every time.
Okay, well, I guess I'd like to see some continuation of what we're seeing in the clinician experience space. So, there are still, we're still far from what I think the sort of ideal is, and I don't know exactly what the solution looks like, but, the best experience, to the extent that somebody has to come and see you as a physician and sit there with you, I think the best experience is one where the computer is invisible as much as possible, and as much of the focus as possible is just put on that interaction, and you understanding, trying to understand what's going on with them and give them some degree of comfort as best you're able, and help solve their problem. There's a little bit. It's tough because I'm not going to say that I would get rid of the computer system entirely. Part of the thinking that I do nowadays is through writing a note. So it's I'm not going to say that it should go away entirely, but as an example, if I am writing a note and I write in my plan that I want to order a particular imaging test, I'd love it if the step that going from that to placing that order, if the distance between those two things collapsed. Like, I've already said what I want to order, so now I have to say it again.
Anticipating what you want to do.
Right. It's like, it's like if there were a resident there and they saw the order and they saw what I had written, they would be able to place that order. So that's an example of something that I'd like to get it to. Yeah, it queues up that order for me. Maybe it shows me 3 orders that are like candidates and I pick the right one.
Love that.
But not like I got to go and type this thing in again separately.
The really good AI resident that can anticipate your needs as a clinician. I love that. Dr. Sanford?
I agree with that. We need that 100%. To go in a different direction, I would like to see an AI agent that works as an educator and is thus not afraid to tell the user that they're wrong. Right? So much of the AI, you see it, we saw it when 4.0 switched to 5, right? On the OpenAI model, it's almost a sycophant. It's always trying to please. It's always trying to draw the user in, and there's some real dangers with that. We've seen, the echo chambers and the mental health issues challenge. I want an AI expert system that I can say, okay, I want to learn CUDA core programming, and I need you to teach it to me. And I don't know, I don't know what I don't know. Here's my background. Here's what I'm comfortable doing, and then to have it it's got access to all of this, and the curriculums are there because it's ready-made. But if I were to try and do it today myself, you get into these weird little tangents, and it doesn't course correct you, and it doesn't tell you when you're wrong. And I think that it would be really, really effective for a large part of the educational system to have these tools alongside every student, but not serving to do their homework for them, not serving to help them plagiarize or cheat, but serving to teach. And the most important aspect of a teacher is someone who is willing to be direct and tell you that you're doing something wrong.
Love that.
So you said 5 years, right?
3 to 5, yeah.
3 to 5. All right. So this is probably more in the 5-year, I think. I think we're in healthcare, we're approaching a point where we have enough data that we can start to digital twin the entirety of the system, right? So think of the healthcare system as an ecosystem that can now be modeled as a digital twin. And we're probably not quite there yet on the patient side, but we can, we're starting to approximate digital twinning for patients as well. I think, kind of going along the lines you said about educator, and you were talking about like a smart agent, that can run co-pilot with a provider. I think, standing on top of these digital twins, we will have these manifestation of agents, or whatever the language you want to use to describe it, that can really absorb and make sense of all the data that's coming into that and provide really intelligent recommendations and maybe even automations to make that whole ecosystem work better. So think about a future where you as a patient have a system that is essentially running, in the background, constantly monitoring your health and potential outcomes. And then when you go to see your provider, that provider has the intelligence brought forward by your independent agent, as well as the best practice from education, from papers, from publications, whatever. And there in the middle, that Venn diagram of what's your predicted future, what is the best interaction, and how do you deploy that for this individual in the context of the provider that you're seeing. I think that's the future.
Love that. So consumer applications
Yeah.
for patients. Wonderful. Thank you so much. We've got time for one question from the audience. I did promise I was going to do that. Anyone? I can't really raise your hand. Yeah, go for it.
So the excellent presentation. And on the question of build versus buy, I want to address sort of both sides of that. First of all, a majority of, I don't know statistics on this, but I would guess a majority of American healthcare is being delivered in systems that have less resources than your systems do to devote to this. From a clinician standpoint, it already feels like we're being distracted from our core mission. I've had colleagues in my health system say, we used to be a hospital with an IT department. Now we're an IT department with an incidental hospital. So when we come to the buy side, from what you gentlemen have shared, it's pretty clear that this is not a single transaction anymore to acquire technology. So you look at the product is good, you buy it. It is now a longitudinal relationship between you and a supplier of the technology. And so I want to ask you, what are the qualities that we should be looking for? Rather than looking at the product itself, should we be looking at things like what is the depth of engineering talent that the supplier has amassed? What is their commitment to solving our problems? What is their commitment to understanding our economic realities so that we don't get into the planned obsolescence of the cell phone, where we just keep bleeding money? Mm-hmm. And should we be looking at those? And my question is, what else would you add to that list of things we should be looking for on the vendor side? That is beyond the product they put in front of us today, because as you said, we're in this whitewater raft, and VUCA, the variable, unpredictable, complex, ambiguous, that describes the world we live in. Yeah. The product that puts in front of us today is obsolete tomorrow. Yeah. And so what sort of longitudinal relationship do we need to seek in our technology partners?
I think you came up with a lot of great things to look at there. The one I would say, and this is sort of the ultimate goalpost, especially as so many of us are transitioning to value-based care, is will you take risk, right? I mean, you as a vendor, are you gonna bind yourself to us, and are you gonna guarantee success to your product? And if it doesn't work, what's your downside?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think that as margins are thinning, the question of what's your business model and what the vendor's long game is, right? If they're a classic Y Combinator, where it's I need to build a book of business and disrupt for 36 months so I can exit, I can't work with you. I'm going to be here hopefully a lot longer than 36 months from now. So the question of will they take risk? How are they adding value and extracting a fair market kind of return on that? Because upside should generate an upside for everyone. But I think that's something that we really explicitly have started asking more so than we used to in the past. And then I think there's in terms of these systems are adapting, so the engineering team and the product team needs to be really aware of that. And it's not we built a product, we shipped the product is now static, and we're going to increase prices. And I'll use Horizon, right? Who here is on Horizon as a virtualization, VMware?
Citrix is the same. So.
Right, yeah. So they built a thing that works. It works marginally well, and
right.
I haven't seen meaningful improvements in it in a very, very long time.
Right.
But I've seen price increases.
Right.
You can't get blood from that stone. So I think that, and then the third part of the product development that I really like seeing and lament seeing, if I don't see it, is the not invented here syndrome, right? Like, so if it didn't come from our shop or if it didn't come from our engineers, it can't possibly be a good idea. If they're not collaborative, and I'm talking about going beyond the simple customer discovery call where they're gonna always seek to say yes to whatever their problem is to you so that we can bend our product to close the sale. I'm talking about real collaboration. Those are the ties that bind to me.
Yeah, I would say there are three things I would say that kind of stand out to me. One is, do they have like a clearly articulated vision of where they see the product going? So like an ambient company that says, we want to extract the maximum amount of value from patient conversations. That's not like a specific roadmap, but it does give me a picture of where I might expect the product to evolve. And also that's not necessarily going to overlap with a lot of the other vendor solutions that we're using. Like, okay, yeah, not most of our vendors aren't really getting involved in patient conversations, so that's helpful. Are they going to be a good partner, which can be tough to suss out because, again, like when they're trying to sell you on something, they're going to tend to be more agreeable. But I would say that like just going through, we have a vendor questionnaire that we've developed for around AI, and just going through that, sometimes you realize you run into more resistance than you would like, and that can be a red flag. Also, talking to existing customers, that's usually a good way to do it. And then I guess the third thing is, and definitely not the least important, is will they still be around in 5 years? So, generally we're cautious about, working with early stage companies. And when we do, we're probably going to approach that partnership differently than we would with a more established vendor. But also, yeah, it helps if they've been operating for 10 to 15 years already. If they have, I like it when they have, physician or other clinical leadership that seems really like they're true believers. I think that's encouraging. But just making sure that they're not going to, either cease operations or, sell out as soon as they get as soon as they have the option. I think those are important too.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking time to share all these perspectives with us. So please join me in applause. Thank you so much.